Tonight, Albany is buzzing again. Embattled former New York State Assembly Speaker Shelly Silver indicted on 3 counts in his federal corruption case. And in U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara's words, stay tuned for more. So what's next for Albany, and will we get reform? And if so, what will it look like? And then we head to Rockland County, where there is new drama in the controversial East Ramapo School District. A new bill would establish state oversight. And tonight we speak with new city assemblyman Ken Zimbrowski about the move and why he and other Rockland lawmakers wrote it. Plus, Richard French speaks to New Jersey leaders about local politics that affects you, and he gives us a complete report from the Walk to Washington. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman. Thanks for joining us. Richard French is on assignment tonight at the Walk to Washington. We'll have a complete report from him coming up. But we want to begin tonight in New York, where former State Assembly Speaker Shelly Silver indicted today on 3 charges in his federal corruption case. Silver charged with honest services wire fraud, mail fraud, and extortion. And as we've reported, Silver is accused of collecting nearly $4 million in payoffs and kickbacks since 2002. Silver has said that he is confident that he will be vindicated in the case. Today, his attorneys released a statement saying, quote, "Our client is not guilty. We can now begin to fight for his total vindication. We intend to do that fighting where it should be done, in court." Silver was removed from his longtime position within the Assemblyman, and Bronx Assemblyman Carl Hastie was elected Speaker earlier this month. All right, let's get to our analysis now, and for that we bring in our panel. Richard Brodsky is here, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Dominic Carter is to his left. He is, of course, a political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly is with us tonight, Republican strategist. And Assemblyman Todd Kaminsky is here, who represents New York's 20th Assembly District. Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie appointed Todd to a bipartisan search committee for Executive Director of New Assembly Office of Ethics and Compliance. He is also a former federal prosecutor. Assemblyman, thanks for being with us. You were also the point person within the Democratic conference when the whole Silver stuff broke. Everybody from the reporting that I've seen turned to you and asked you how serious these charges were against Shelly Silver. From the personal standpoint, before we get to the analysis, what kind of position did that put you in as one of your first assignments in office? Is everybody looking to you to ask what to do about Sheldon Silver?
Sure. Well, just to back up a second, first of all, it's an honor to be here. But I will say that I just learned where the bathroom was in the assembly when all this broke. And I wouldn't characterize it as everybody turned to me as to what to do, but certainly there were certain people that asked me what I thought of the case. And a lot of times defendants make a decision that may benefit their case, but may hurt them in their jobs or politically when they cannot answer what's been raised. So you have a 35-page complaint that was written by a federal prosecutor. Today there was a 25-page indictment that followed. And on the other side, for strategic reasons that I absolutely understand, you want to save your defense and preserve it for a possible trial, you don't hear anything on the other side. Also, I did political corruption cases with the U.S. Attorney's Office, so I understood the law there. And I don't think it's a large stretch to have any person read that and say, wow, this is serious. And I certainly don't think it was earth-shattering, but there's no doubt that it was an extremely tumultuous time, and I'm glad we're getting past that and talking about reform.
So, and before we get to given that background, knowing what you know about the complaint and now about the indictment today, how difficult a position is Shelly Silver in, and how do you think he's prepared when it comes to facing these charges?
I really don't want to speak specifically about that. I have no inside knowledge of any of the facts of the case. I could tell you when the Southern District of New York, like it would have been in my case with the Eastern District of New York, when federal prosecutors bring a case, I would have to say on the most part they bring cases they think that they could win and that they're prepared and they've spent a lot of time preparing. That being said, I can't really speak about this case, but what I can say is that, for 5 years doing corruption cases, I thought long and hard about how to make federal prosecutors a little less busy. In other words, I could have stayed in that office and continued to get cases and cases, but I really saw an opportunity when the assemblyman in my district retired to make systemic reforms. I certainly didn't think it would happen this way and the opportunity would come so soon, and I certainly didn't ask for it to happen in the form of the speaker getting arrested, but that opportunity is presented to us now.
If you remove all politics from the situation and you could just institute any level of reform, again, given that experience that you had in prosecuting corruption in politics, what reform does Albany need, in your opinion?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked that, and it happens to be, in a good coincidence, exactly what is being focused on right now, and that is with outside income. I think, one of the main cases that I spent my time on is prosecuting former State Senate Majority Leader Pedro Espada. And that involved almost very little to do with the legislature. It was about how we ran a healthcare center. If you look at what current State Senator Sampson is being looked at, if you looked at what Assemblyman Boylan was being prosecuted for, and now you look at this new case, it involves outside income. And you have an understandable public viewpoint now, which is we don't know what you're doing in that other job. Is it really conflicting with where your heart should be and your mind should be, which is focusing on the public when you make decisions in the legislature? So we need to take a good look at that. The governor and Speaker Hastie have really talked about that and focused on that, and I'm confident that we're going to get something done there.
Does that outside income need to be limited or just better disclosed, or both?
So we have two choices, and I think they're both good ones, but they're different. One is we become a full-time legislature, which may involve a pay raise to make it commensurate with the job, and we don't have outside income, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. What I think is more likely to happen is we're going to have far more transparency, where the public doesn't have to wonder what one is doing when they go to that other job.
Bill, does that sound like it's enough to try to stamp out some of the corruption that we've seen in Albany?
I mean, I think that the transparency is certainly a big step forward. Richard Brodsky here talks a lot about transparency of people serving on boards, and that's right too. That has to happen as well. If you're on a corporate board, that's got to be transparent. It doesn't have to just be earned income. And I don't mean to step on your lines, Richard, but that's a really good point. I think transparency is a start. I prefer that to limited income. That feels un-American to me. I think people can go out there and work on the side. I'm a term limit guy, and I didn't used to be. I used to be anti-term limit. I used to say people have a right to, the voters have a right to impose term limits every couple of years, 2, 4, or 6, depending on the office. But I think that you need to have a constant turnover, because I don't think the public gets a really clear choice of candidate because of backroom stuff. But that's my take.
Richard, is greater disclosure enough?
No.
How's it both ways, Richard?
Yeah, I'll get there. Look, I think the members of the Democratic Conference were fortunate to have somebody with the experience and the intelligence that Assemblyman Kaminsky brought to this. Having said that, I think there are some problems here. The governor's proposal and everything I've heard talked about is for earned income. If you have a job, you have to give that up. There is just as much likelihood of corruption coming from unearned income, from trust funds, from stock ownership, from corporate ownership, and I caution the notion that it's the working stiff who's the problem here. Second of all, the notion that the real problem is outside income, which is what I heard the Assemblyman say. I'm really not sure that's the case. I think the real problem is the legal corruption involved in huge amounts of money flowing in campaign finance stuff.
Well, but
and if
should
I
we,
had
should
to
we
answer
at
the
least
question, it would be do something on the outside income. But my God, if you're collecting $40 million in campaign contributions or $4 million in referrals, the ethical problem is about the same.
All right, well, let's focus on, let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good, and let's focus on the illegal corruption before we deal with the legal just yet. And Assemblyman, what about the unearned income? Is there enough political, I guess, courage in Albany right now to tackle that? Is that enough of a problem where it needs to be tackled?
Sure. So you actually, your question presupposed that there was one answer, and you said pick one thing, and then you said, is that enough? I actually don't think it is enough.
Okay.
So outside income is important, but right now we have a number of things we could do. Campaign finance, absolutely something needs to be done there. What about having outside agencies have some teeth so that when they have an issue with a disclosure filing, for instance, someone actually is worried that it'll matter. So between campaign finance, between outside income, per diem reform is something Speaker Hastie has spoken about. This search committee that I'm chairing is helping the Assembly find an internal ethics compliance officer. So it has to be a multi-pronged approach. I agree with the former Assemblyman that there's no doubt, there's no magic bullet. But if you asked me, which is the main thing we could tackle, it would be outside income.
Let me jump back in, if I may, just for a second, with apologies. Bill's notion of term limits, when added to this focus on the legislature, which it needs to be a focus, can have the real impact of weakening the institution, which in a democracy is what saves us from bad outcomes. Everybody has a chief executive. The Russians have a chief executive. The Saudis have a chief executive. We need a functioning legislature with ethics, but not weakened. And I think both you guys need to be careful.
All right. Dominic, I want to ask you, because I don't know anybody who's a bigger critic of Albany or at least the way Albany functions or doesn't function, than you are.
And so having a federal prosecutor is a great thing. But who's going to pass these reforms? Do you think that they're going to police themselves? It's never going to happen. And when we talk about term limits, I'm sorry.
You always bring us to reality, Dominic.
Oh yeah, I'm going to bring it to reality, and I'm going to do it real fast. In terms of the interest of television.
Have you heard
term
any?
limits is not going to change anything. There are some. I'm not saying all, Mr. Brodsky.
We could shoot
No,
them.
but there are some. These are poverty pimps, crooks. They're gonna push the limit of the law.
my view on
They're going to push the limit of the law, no matter what happens.
Have you
Andrew.
heard any proposals or any suggestions that you think might change some of that culture in Albany that
It's
you
a
despise
good thing
so
to
much?
have former federal prosecutors in Albany, but these guys and women, you think they're going to police themselves?
So
Are we really that
what's the
naive to
answer?
believe
What's
that
the
they're going to
answer?
pass legislation to shut down their own a little side incomes?
What's the answer?
The answer is we need more of a spotlight on Albany to watch what's going on in terms of media, to watch what's
So a
going on.
spotlight will cure the problem.
No, I'm not saying to cure the problem, but it's a start. See, you have people like Brodsky, and he gets offended when I say these things because his heart is in all the right places. But half of those poverty pimps in Albany, their hearts are not in the right place. They're looking to rob taxpayers, and they do it.
The governor, the controller, the attorney general.
Well, no. The governor's in a unique position who pushed reform but didn't do anything about it until now.
Assemblyman, what about the politics? There is Dominic said it, and I would say it too. Oftentimes when you're talking about reforms from lawmakers, you're asking lawmakers to rein in their own power, their own access to money. Is there enough political will in Albany to actually pass anything with teeth that will make a dent in some of the culture that we've seen there?
So let me just state something that's obvious, but I think needs to be stated. If it doesn't happen now, then when? I mean, there is
the next round of indictments and arrests.
Okay, so there's the specter of more out there, right? But that should certainly make us want to do this sooner and better. So if the tide is cresting or has crested, we have to act now. The public wants it. All the leaders are talking about it in the right way. I may have been here only a few weeks, but I'm very optimistic. I'm being told by the people that matter all the right thing.
But what are you hearing from your fellow members of the Assembly? Are they willing to potentially rein in their own power or their own access to these dollars in order to fix what's broken?
I can't speak for everyone on the specifics, but everyone knows something has to happen. And the Assembly is led by a speaker who, 2 minutes after taking the rostrum for the first time, Speaker Hastie talked about ethics reform in his second sentence. So it's on the front of everyone's mind. Something good is going to be done. I'm going to be pushing for it in my capacity, but I'm very optimistic. I hope I'm proven right.
Let me go around the table. I want to know, will ethics reform pass, and will it have teeth enough to at least curtail some of the problems we've seen, Bill?
I think an extraordinarily watered down version of ethics reform that legislators will be able to claim that they passed ethics reform. It'll be in the talking points. It'll be on TV commercials at re-election time. But I think it'll amount to spit.
Richard Brodsky.
The problem is campaign finance reform, where millions of dollars pass. There's unlikely to be that because of resistance from the Republicans. There will be some changes in transparency that will be to the good. The problem isn't lack of laws. The problem is lack of enforcement, and that problem seems to have been solved.
Dominic Carter.
What was your last line, Bill? You said it'll amount to
Spit.
A PR move?
A PR move.
Yeah.
There you go. That's my perspective.
All right. Assemblyman, thank you so much for joining us. I apologize for some of the behavior of the panel, but it's great having you here. We'll hope to have you back.
I hope the spirit of idealism triumphs here.
This table.
Guys, what do you think?
You're talking to me tonight.
Maybe the wrong room for that, but thank you very much. Up next, we're going to head to East Ramapo, where the state is again stepping in to get more of a firm grasp on the business behind the scenes in the controversial school district. After the break, we're going to speak with an assemblyman who's been working on a bill to establish state oversight. We'll hear what he has to say next.